Hi, Eric Cole here again with the Design Studio for Community Solutions, talking to some of our favorite friends and allies in our community work. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Ava Stone, who's a Community Outreach Associate with us here at the Design Studio at the Watts College. Hi, Ava.
Hi, Eric.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. We're thrilled you could join us for this quick conversation. So Ava, we're just trying to talk to different folks who do kind of community-based work and ask them kind of how they got into this work and really what motivates them. And so wondered if you would kind of tell us part of your story.
I think what motivates me is just the idea of doing mission-driven work. I think actually, like, reflecting on like my past 2 years especially, I never really understood the concept of going to work for a company just to do a job. There was always some sort of connection to the subject matter of my work and feeling like there was a connection to my everyday life that really motivates me to get up and do something each day. And somehow, like, I just always kind of knew that, you know, I couldn't imagine a life where I'm not working towards things that I actually care about. Or I realized that some people do compartmentalize that in the work that they do, that they wake up and they have their hobbies and they go to work and it has nothing to do with everything and they don't really understand how it connects to their lives. And so I really enjoy working in the social sector because I feel like I'm never really stepping out of the world that I live in. I'm constantly making sense of who I am in it and then also relating to others and who they are in it. And I get to learn about a number of things that I haven't experienced them. And I get to work on how to make things better.
That's really cool. It's funny, one of our questions was about kind of what's impacted you the most outside of work. And so it's interesting to hear your answer where you kind of woven where there's not really a delineation there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and once again, this comes with maturity where I went to undergrad for political science. So I went to college to study, you know, a fairly abstract subject, and then I had to figure out how it was tangible without really realizing that that's not the average experience. And in some ways it's a privileged experience. And I think in the past 3 years, I was realizing how much that affected my concept of work and what that means for other people. And so it's definitely like a new thing and a realization. And then also there's the caveat that there's fatigue that comes with it. I think that in the past couple of years, especially, there's some days where I know I love my job and I've been fortunate to work with really amazing, inspiring people, but I still kind of do feel burnout. And it's because I'm not really compartmentalizing my life sometimes, that there is this personal element that I feel to my work. So in some ways there's like an emotional investment and then sometimes an emotional exhaustion that happens. So it is a balance that has to be striked when having the perspective that I have on the work that I do and going to work each day. And it's like the benefit of it is also sometimes like something that needs to be managed.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that and really relate to it. It's actually a really good segue into one of the other topics we want to talk about, which is the kind of current state of affairs. We're talking here on the 2nd of June, and we've had an unprecedented virus incident, and our home, work, family lives have all merged, kind of together to that point. So we are asking folks kind of how has that looked to you, either professionally or personally, as we've kind of gone through this social distancing and quarantine period.
Mm-hmm. It's been really weird and awkward, right? It's just like in a nutshell, there's been a lot of highs and lows of recognizing that I'm in a field where we have the privilege to call out our response to situations that affect society. In this case, it includes public health, the responsibility of institutions and organizations to keep the public safe and healthy. And so with that, it's, I found myself pursuing a career where I wanted to be around people who could influence the way that we respond to things in an urgent and effective manner. And that even with that, there's still a political element where you have to pick and choose how you respond even when you're in it. And I've had to learn a lot about that in the course of my career, but I think especially as a member of the design studio for community solutions, where we're serving a community with a constituency of undocumented workers, of people who are hugely affected by this. We're constantly uncovering nuanced information on how they're affected by this more so than others, and how we use our work as a way to both have a platform to talk about the things that we're finding, but then also not just talk about it, but how do we actually push for an effective response to help that community? And I think that there's like an element of creating that as a culture, and it's hard because I know I have colleagues every day like yourself who have to respond in a certain way, and it's not necessarily the way that you would want to personally respond. Right. And I think that that's something that people in the nonprofit sector struggle with a lot, because we're not really ourselves personally. We're also representing an organization. We're representing the organizations we're affiliated with, and it gets a little dicey. And so I think with that, that's kind of what makes it a little awkward.
Yeah.
In that sense. On the other end, being able to spend my 8-hour workday researching what community organizations are doing in response to it when institutions aren't necessarily doing certain things I'd be looking for has been the silver lining, and then being able to amplify that. And then I think our organization has done a really great and unique thing by amplifying what we're finding. And that in and of itself is a service. And then also taking the time to have it translated adequately so that it's not just our partners that are getting it, but it's their clients. And I don't think that there's a lot of organizations who kind of sit in the position that we have, everybody struggles with, what do I do? How am I helpful? How do I not become a burden to who I'm trying to help? And it feels like a very small thing, but the fact that we're doing it and not a lot of people are just doing that collection of information, I think has been a really big, important thing. And that's how we've decided to respond. And so it's just, it's how do you respond to things when you're in a position of, I wouldn't say power, but influence.
Yeah.
Well,
I like the way you said it. I mean, it's a privilege. It's the space. It's like the space and the time and the wherewithal to be able to do some of the work. I think the hard part is holding and opening then that space up for community members and people of color and people in the that are disproportionately impacted by social determinants of health. Like that's the next step and that's the hard part. That's even harder with social distancing, et cetera. I'm really struck by, that was a fantastic answer. There was a lot there. I'm really struck by this idea that, that kind of nonprofit, less maybe formal, non-governmental set of resources and organizations are providing a lot of the services right now. Even though we're working together to collect these resources, then this update that we send out, I hadn't thought about that entirely. And
surprise.
That's a really good point. I think the other point you made that you did it very well. You said it very politically, which is great. But it's also like this position that we find ourselves in, which is to be able to observe and to analyze, and in some cases evaluate. And then how do you, call out or, make the suggestions for improvement when some of the situations are pretty dire, right? Where there aren't a lot of resources in a neighborhood like Maryville, or there are not a lot of resources that are positioned to reach the people that are there. And how do you do
Right.
that without just sounding, overall negative and, turning people off? That's a
Mhm.
challenge we have. So,
Yeah, I think in that, to that end, it's that with the relationships that have been formed, it's almost kind of like there's like a grace of timeline where there's information and then we're kind of ready when people do come to want to invite us to be involved.
mm-hmm.
It's never kind of like an unexpected surprise when somebody comes to us from the community with a problem. We do kind of already know, but
Yeah.
we're not out there vocalizing it as a problem. We're kind of like, well, we're aware, we're informed, and when you come to us, we'll learn more and how can we engage,
Mm-hmm.
which is admirable.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Okay, so we want to shift gears and ask you. I mean, there's more than COVID-19 happening now. We've come to, in some ways, finally a conversation, intense conversation about race and equity because of tragic events that have kicked this off here in the last week. That you add to that the pandemic and just all these things that are happening. I'd love for you to speak about any of that, but then particularly kind of how do you deal or cope? What are some of the what is the one set of advice you would give to people, to somebody that's just trying to find their way through some of this?
Hmm. Oh, there's so much to say. Um, I think an appropriate place to start is to name that, I'm a native East Coaster. And when I came to Phoenix a year ago, I was very depressed by, taking stock of the racial history and how that panned out. And I recall one of the first meetings that you took me to with the Phoenix Revitalization organization, and the executive director was telling us her story and how her grandparents, I believe, or parents, did not allow them to speak Spanish in the home. And that therefore she did not speak Spanish, and that did affect her ability to relate with other immigrants and migrants in her community today, and how that does influence a level of racial unity in communities. And that's, to me, a really big thing. It's a really sad thing. And then furthermore, the history of Indian School Road and the boarding school where Native American children were sent to effectively be, their identity was washed away. And that was a part of American educational history that I had only read about and had not experienced. And it is very unique to the West Coast, but is not absent of the themes that have existed across the states. But to see it was very daunting to me. And I think the most depressing thing to me was that one of the insights coming from the meeting was that people felt that because of how systemic that sort of, for lack of a better term, whitewashing was, that it's been hard for Phoenix to see a lot of civil rights leaders rise up at the scale that you've seen in other communities. And that depressed me, and I kind of bought into it. I think in the past year, I don't think that's true. I think that, Phoenix is a car-driven city. It's not a dense city, so it's really easy to not see the things that are going on, but the community is there, the organizing is there, and people represent a lot of different things. And so all of this happening, as anxious as I am as a person of color in Phoenix, when I looked out my window on Saturday night and saw tear gas and Black, brown, and white people running away, I was so happy that it was happening, because I didn't believe, and I didn't know that I didn't believe. Like, there was a core belief in me that there was complacency around me, that we had been defeated in some way and had lost a core part of our ability to get together, because like the things that could be done to split us apart had worked. And I see now that that's not true. And I see now that that's not true more than ever. I think that it's a matter of amplifying the things that do exist. And, you know, sadly, it took a site like that to kind of wake me up out of that reverie. And, you know, to be somebody that works in the work that we do, not realizing that that's a core belief that I had, that, you know, I think sometimes I just go home and it's like, well, at least I'm doing this, at least I'm doing something, or I met this really great person. But to feel like we could scale up out of the community to talk about attitudes, to talk about, you know, people actually coming out and protesting something that we know that goes on in the way that they have, I just didn't expect it for Phoenix. And that's inspired me. And so going to your question about how do I cope, I've reflected on that for the past 3 days. I talked to my VISTA leader the other day. She was telling me how she felt like she didn't know how to feel. She's anxious, she's this. And I was like, you know, I looked out my window and I realized that I'm not alone in that anxiety. And that I didn't realize that my problem is I've been feeling really alone in that anxiety. Despite the fact that I work with people who feel that way every day, but it takes something like that, you know? And so I told her, like, you know, try and find peace in what you can do, and know that the feeling of lack of control is shared, and that there's people around you that you can talk to, and that you can talk to me, and like, let's just keep talking. Yeah, that might make us feel better. And so that's kind of how I've been dealing with it, is one, looking at myself and seeing how I might have been responding or not talking, and just, you know, absorbing this as like, this is what I know. I hope that we protest. But instead I'm saying, well, no, you know what? Now I want to talk about it. I'm not the only one that feels this way. I want to be here for people who feel conflicted or feel like it's complicated for them to vocalize that. And I totally understand that. You know, social media can be a scary place to like be vulnerable. You know, and a protest could be too. So, sorry, that was a very lengthy answer.
No, it was great. I love it. It you know, I think you almost did that like flip, that jujitsu move to like flip it into, you know, almost personal motivation around, because that's what I mean, I relate to what you said about, you know, none of this is, I mean, this is not new. This is historically tragic, right? Like the underlying conditions and the things that have us here, I mean, those didn't just begin. And so, yeah, I mean, all these, you know, lots of terrible things happening you don't want to happen, but at the same time, as a society, we've avoided taking on these issues, and we've, you know, oppressed people for centuries. So I really relate. I can relate to what you're saying. I also think that connectivity and like communicating with people and kind of being open, that's come up in some of our other conversations we've done about how important that is. And it's also harder right now just because everybody's so, you know, so distant.
It's tense.
Yeah, the natural ways to connect. The other thing I thought about was, as we've, you know, kind of interacted with groups in the community, is the number of groups that say to us, you know, how do you motivate young people, or how do you get young people involved? And I think we're seeing young people involved. I mean, clearly frustrated, angry. You know, it's not to say every protester is young or every protester is angry or doing something inappropriate, but there is clearly something in what's going on that is tapping into motivating young people. And I think that is a one of those things you see in movements and times of change like this, is an emerging voice and emerging. So I think there's something to learn from that and to understand. anyway, that may be taking us too far afield, but it's one thing I've been thinking about too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really surprising. Like another thing that kind of blew my mind or like helped me recognize like my bias in my own generation is that there's some people that I think I've built up a kind of wall where I've experienced a lot, and I've realized that in some cases, more so than not, I don't necessarily expect the worst from people, but I think as a coping mechanism, I don't expect much from people. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that I think seeing people on social media today, to whatever extent, if it's just they're posting an all black picture, or they're saying things, there's people that I'm very surprised have decided to contribute to that. And I'm looking at my generation a little differently. And I think I'm starting to see that it's a generation that's resilient.
Yeah.
That there's some things where we're very ironic, we're very sarcastic, we're funny, we make light of things, and then people think we don't take things seriously. But I think that that's not the case. I think that we're that way because we're seeing everything. And then for a while, it's, you know, we watched the 2016 election happen. We, you know, came from the 9/11 Patriot Act response. Like, people have been responding to things and making rules to things in our generation that I don't think we've necessarily been able to make sense of when it was happening. And then as we reflect on it, it's very, it makes you angry. And so I think you're seeing people kind of come out and speak out. And I don't think that that's a very American thing to do at first. You know, I think of like American culture is very kind of like, we deal with things. We solve things. We work really hard. We don't talk about our feelings because bad things happen. You know, and now there's a new movement of, you know, mental health, depression, more things are normal. And I think you're talking about a generation that's experiencing a lot really fast.
Yes.
And it's really, really diverse, and it's dealing with parents and grandparents that have different attitudes. So we're kind of always confronted all the time with like, trying to normalize things, these different conflicting messages, and they're just being very vocal about it because, you know, there's social media. So it is very interesting. But I think like I'm surprised once again. You know, when I think about my high school class, I don't think there was a lot of people that were very politically active.
Yeah.
It was like not the norm. And now it seems like I'm surrounded by a group of friends that are like anything like, you know, they're just only politically active and engaged. So, I don't know.
Wow, it's fascinating. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes to talk to the video screen.
Yeah, this is so much fun.
Interviewing, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it. Bye.